Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Nature-Based Solutions for Greener Cities. My name is John Maughan. I lead the research program here at the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, or GGKP. The GGKP is a global community of experts and institutions. We're devoted to collaboratively generating, managing, and sharing knowledge. As far as we know, we're the largest devoted to those three goals. We started with just 4 founding partners: the OECD, World Bank, UN Environment, and the Global Green Growth Institute, only a few years ago in 2012. And since then, we've grown to over 55 organizations. Today, we have 4 experts with us, including our moderator, who are focused on new methods for bringing nature into development planning, and particularly into cities. They focus on different management approaches for bringing nature into urban planning, and not only in a way that increases the efficiency of how we use our natural resources within our economies, but also how we restore nature. In other words, how can we pursue a vibrant economy while restoring the nature we depend on? That's the topic of today's discussion. And further, I'd like to add, how do we do that? How do we restore nature? How do we focus on our economies while also fulfilling many of the social and political goals that each of us has in our home countries? This is how we approach well-rounded sustainable development from the social, economic, and importantly, the environmental side. I want to mention a few items on logistics for today's webinar. First of all, we encourage all of you, the audience, to raise questions to our speakers. There's a chat box on your screen. Simply enter your question there and we'll post it back. We'll share selected questions from among that list with our panelists. Also, immediately after the webinar, we'll have a survey. It takes only 5 minutes to complete, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. If you'd like to take a look again at this video, at this webinar, we do have a recording, and it will be available on the GGKP website within 24 hours. Please do take care to share that around to your networks and spread the word. Finally, if you have any technical issues while you're on the webinar today, please reach out to us. You can use our email address, contact@ggkp.org. Once again, that's contact@ggkp.org, CONTACT@ggkp.org. Next, there's 2 things I'd like to mention before we move on. First is that this is a discussion we're beginning today, but that will continue here at GGKP. Notably, next month, on the 27th to 28th November, we'll be holding our 5th annual conference. It takes place in Washington, D.C. and is hosted by the World Bank, and we'll be focusing on sustainable infrastructure. We'll also have a session specifically focused on nature-based solutions, our topic today, and how it interrelates with the development of infrastructure for reducing disaster risk, or for at least managing the risk of disasters. Also, on November 30th and the 1st of December, the GGKP is launching a new working group, an expert working group devoted to natural capital and green growth. We will focus there on not only protecting but also enhancing natural capital and global development, particularly at the national level. To find out more about any of these events, please visit us at greengrowthknowledge.org, the GGKP web platform. Now, before I move on, just to signal how important this topic is, the European Commission has asked us to make a statement. This is a topic, nature-based solutions in cities particularly, that the EU supports highly and places a great value in. So on behalf of the European Commission, please allow me to make this statement. The European Commission, Directorate General for Research and Innovation, welcomes the GGKP-sponsored webinar on nature-based solutions for greener cities, which is in line with its key research and innovation policy priorities on co-design, co-development, and co-implementation of nature-based solutions as cost-effective means to address societal challenges in cities both in Europe and worldwide. The European Commission is very pleased to note that the urban agenda for the European Union, the Habitat 3 New Urban Agenda, as well as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and let's not forget the SDGs, recognize the crucial role of nature-based solutions in fostering inclusive urban regeneration, enhancing resilience, and increasing citizens' wealth and well-being. Building on the momentum of these European and international commitments, we are investing, the EC is investing, through Horizon 2020, the biggest European research and innovation program ever, with nearly 80 billion euros of funding, 80 billion, over 7 years only, from 2014 to 2020. It focuses on large multi-stakeholder demonstration projects for smart and sustainable cities with nature-based solutions, which act as living labs involving both front-runner and follower municipalities, those around the border. These demonstrators are widening the solution portfolio beyond technological innovation and include social innovation for new governance, finance and business models that can help develop and deploy nature-based solutions. Promoting city-to-city peer learning is at the core of our open to the world research and innovation strategy to share knowledge and experiences, upscale and replicate nature-based solutions. For instance, in the context of the European China or European Latin American sustainable urbanization flagship initiatives, as well as through the EU-Brazil sector dialogue on nature-based solutions for renaturing cities. The EC is glad that 2 of its speakers are on today's webinar, notably Gillian and Ania, who are also key actors involved in the EC's Horizon 2020 demonstration projects. The EC hopes that these speakers will inspire you, giving you a hint of the exciting innovation actions that it is funding on nature-based solutions. And the EC wishes us a successful event. And I'd like to add on behalf of the GGKP that we are also joined by Kevin and Juliano, who are extremely inspiring speakers as well, and represent a perspective outside of the European context. And one of the goals today is to bring these 2 different contexts together and talk through some of the differences and some of the synergies between the 2. And so let me move on without further ado and introduce to you today's moderator, Dr. Kevin Urama. This is a man so accomplished it's very difficult in 5 minutes to sum up his past. Currently he's serving as senior advisor to the president of the African Development Bank and has formerly worked as the inaugural managing director of the Quantum Global Research Lab. He's held leading positions advising national governments and global research institutes. He's also executive director of the African Technology Policy Studies Network, the inaugural president of the African Society of Ecological Economics, and I could go on. The experience, his experience is phenomenal. Let me mention 2 other areas where he continues to be active. Dr. Urama is a member of scientific panels and advisory boards in the global realm, including the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, the International Resource Panel, and let's not forget the GGKP Advisory Committee. He's also very active in academic and research work. He holds a doctorate of philosophy and land economy. He has 2 master's degrees, both in philosophy and agricultural economics. His PhD is from Cambridge. He has numerous distinctions, which I will not go into in detail. I will mention one. Recently, he was Technology Executive of the Year. He was named so by the Africa Technology Awards group. And he also serves on numerous editorial boards in academic journals. So I could spend the rest of our time going on about Dr. Urama's qualifications, but I think you'd like to hear it from him first. So let me pass it to you. Dr. Urama, welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you very much, John, and welcome to all our panelists, our distinguished panelists, and our participants as well. You're all welcome to this very interesting topic of today. We're going to be hearing from three distinguished panelists today. One, Ania, who is the coordinator of the Governance and Social Innovation team of ICLEI, the Local Governments for Sustainability. This is a global network of more than 1,500 cities, towns, and regions committed to building a sustainable future. Ania will be speaking to us today about nature in the city, nature-based solutions in urban governance. Then she will be followed up by Gillian, who is the principal of the Place, Strategy and Environmental Infrastructure team within the Development Plan Group at the Glasgow City Council, with town planning experience in both rural and highly urbanized areas. He will be speaking to us today about connecting nature. Juliano Assuncao is the next, who is a professor of economics at the Pontifícia Católica University of Rio de Janeiro and executive director of the Climate Policy Initiative in Brazil. His research focus is on aspects of economics, including agricultural economics, institutions, and financial intermediation. We'll be speaking to us today about food and fuel challenges, evidences from Brazil. Each of them will have 10 minutes in sequence following each other, after which we are going to then have a 30-minute discussion with you, all the listeners in the panel discussion today. The title of the discussion today will be on nature-based solutions for greener cities. With this, I'd like to pass on now to Ania to give her presentation. Ania?
Yes, thank you.
Over to you. Thank you.
I am just... Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to be here in this great company. It's also, I have to say, a bit of an impossible challenge to talk to you about nature-based solutions for 10 minutes, but I'll do my best. But please take my presentation as a teaser that will hopefully open the way for further discussion. As Kevin mentioned, I am a Governance and Social Innovation Coordinator for ICLEI, meaning that I am a sociologist. So I will have a more sociologist's perspective, a governance perspective on nature-based solutions. ICLEI, as Kevin also mentioned, is a global network of cities working for sustainability. I am working in European Secretariat, meaning that my experience mostly refers to European cities. Here in the European Secretariat, which is based in Freiburg, Germany, we are working in 3 themes. We are working on sustainable economy and procurement, sustainable resources, resilience and climate, and my team, governance and social innovation. As you probably realize, nature-based solutions really cut across all these 3 topics, but today we're going to focus on the governance and social innovation part. But before we move there, I would like to share with you some of the projects that ICLEI has been involved in. As also mentioned in the statement from the European Commission, we have been lucky to be very actively involved in the European community of cities and researchers working for nature-based solutions. And I would like to mention just 4 of the projects. So the 2 ones in the upper part of the slide, Green Search and Enable, are older projects coming to an end now that are focusing specifically on green infrastructure. And for instance, Green Search was focusing on classifying of green spaces in the city, and is also now publishing a handbook that will help practitioners to develop green infrastructure in the cities. The two bottom ones are more focusing specifically on nature-based solutions. I will leave connecting nature, as you will hear from Gillian all about it. But I would just like to highlight Naturevation. It's a project that has been running for around a year now, and we are looking there at developing an assessment framework for nature-based solutions so that we are able to clearly show the impact that they have. Also looking at the business models, regulation, and assessing their use in over 100 European cities. So I would really encourage you to keep an eye on this project. However, my own experience with nature-based solutions comes from another project, also an EU-funded research project on accelerating sustainability transitions, when we have looked at nature-based solutions and their transformative social impact in cities. And from this perspective, we were interested in nature-based solutions and the place where top-down and bottom-up initiatives in cities meet. So maybe to start, since I am also opening this webinar, what do we actually talk about when we talk about nature-based solutions? And as you see, the answers are really manifold, and I could really write many, many more here. And the thing is that they start from really small solutions like permeable pavements to really large-scale city-wide solutions like ventilation corridors, for instance. Some of them seem really, I would say, obvious and easy, like urban gardens, something that we all know. Others maybe sound a bit more technical and complicated, like bioremediation, which is cleaning up polluted soils. But what I think is really important is that we are looking now at innovating with nature and how we can bring more nature and natural features and processes into the cities. And whatever definition you take, and there are many of them, I just listed here, well, I listed two of the most popular plus the one we developed in our project. But I think the most comprehensive one is the one by the European Commission that is looking at nature-based solutions as responding to societal challenges. And by societal challenges, we mean issues like climate change, but also disaster risk reduction, but also human health and well-being. And these societal challenges are addressed in a way that is bringing multiple benefits: environmental, social, and economic. And these multi-benefits is really what makes nature-based solutions so important. Because when you hear about this, when you hear about urban gardens, green roofs, you might think, well, what's so special about it? No, many cities have been doing it. It has been done for many years. So why this term now? And I think this term has been also brought in to really show the multiple benefits that bringing nature back into our cities can have. And some maybe we have known about for a long time, like air quality, but others like social justice and cohesion, or also economic opportunities and green jobs, are the ones that still need more evidence, information, and more awareness raising. And the image that you see here comes from the impact evaluation framework developed as part of Eclipse project. And this is actually one of the questions that is very much developed now in European research on nature-based solutions. And namely the question how we can quantify, describe, study the impact that nature-based solutions have in the cities. However, personally, I think that nature-based solutions and the fact that we are now looking at this term are also part of the broader shift, of the shift that we really need at this stage in human history, to not shy away from big words. And the quote that you see here comes from Janine Benyus, the pioneer of biomimicry, which is a broader term than nature-based solutions. But she's basically highlighting the power of nature and the natural organisms and how we should be learning from the natural world. And I think this is really the humility that we as humanity need to look what we can learn from nature, how we can mimic natural processes in our cities, and to maybe yes, step away from our hubris, from this idea that technology can save everything, and be a little bit more observant of what is going on around us. But going more towards concrete situations in your own cities, in your own communities, I would like to just leave you with 3 key aspects that I think anyone looking to start working with nature-based solutions should consider. First one of them is protecting what we have, because it's much easier to keep what is already there than to try to restore it, bring it back into the city. And this protecting applies to knowledge and skills, the things that maybe our grandparents, our grandmothers were able to do, like beekeeping, but it also applies to places, so to green places in the cities. In many cities in Europe, it was quite customary to have urban allotments that have been then turned into new housing developments, and now people are really desperate for a patch of green in the city. So think about protecting both the places, the green places, nature in the city, but also knowledge and skills related to this. The second aspect is about connecting, that is about connecting people, and I was mentioning later this earlier this social innovation project that I was involved in, and there is really a lot of evidence showing that nature in the city provides a great opportunity to connect across generations, across cultures, across sectors, and this is something that cities and local governments should be making more use of. And the picture you see here is actually an example from Freiburg, the city where I'm based, of a multicultural garden where local community, together with newly arrived refugees, is developing this part of land. But I think apart from connecting people in a broader sense, we also need to think about connecting agendas. So connecting agendas on the local and European level. And the example I'm using here is the example from the city of Bologna that was working with local businesses interested in offsetting their carbon emissions and putting the money into tree planting. So they connected corporate social responsibility with the need to give more nature to the city. And interestingly, this project developed then further from working with businesses to working with citizens. And Bologna developed Open Gaia, a crowdfunding platform for citizens to co-fund tree planting. But talking about financing agenda, about connecting agendas, see, I'm all in a financing mood now. Talking about connecting agendas, I think on a broader level, we also have to see how to connect, for instance, a smart city agenda that has been very strong and really rallying a big, vibrant community around it with the nature-based solutions. And I'm happy to see the Green Growth Knowledge Platform being interested in this topic, because I think it gives a hope for a better connection across these communities. And finally, the third point is about learning. And luckily, there is a lot of knowledge out there, and I would say that it's really growing in an extreme speed. So just to mention 3 sources when you can look for knowledge. They have all been developed as part of the European Commission activities. So first one is OPLA. It's a knowledge platform and a marketplace with a broader focus than nature-based solutions. But what you can find there, you can find an excellent collection of nature-based solutions case studies from European cities that are looking exactly of how it was done, how much it was costing, who was involved, and what kind of benefits have been identified. So I can really warmly recommend this platform. The second one, a newly launched one, is specifically focused on nature-based solutions. It's called Think Nature, and you will find there the outputs from all the EU-funded projects related to nature-based solutions, including the large-scale demonstrators such as Connecting Nature. And finally, it was already mentioned in the statement from the European Commission. Those of you that come from Europe might be familiar with the EU Urban Agenda. It's a new way of working on the European level between the Commission, the member states and the cities that are working in 12 partnerships on 12 topics identified as crucial for urban development, and one of them is sustainable land use and nature-based solutions. So I would also encourage you to follow the work of this group to see what kind of challenges cities are facing in implementing nature-based solutions, and also perhaps contribute your ideas and recommendations to this process. And this is the end of this very quick tour through all things nature-based solutions related. I would like to encourage you to take a look at the projects I mentioned. Again, I warmly recommend Naturevation and the papers, ideas developed there. And if you have any question, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. Thank you very much.
Hi, Gillian.
Hi.
Yeah. Now,
Sorry,
in 10 minutes, please can you talk to us about connecting nature, please?
I can. I need to see if I can share my screen with you, which is not working. So sorry about that. I will. Here we go. Show my screen. Hello, sorry about that delay. I'm a town planner from Glasgow, and I'm going to talk to you about our involvement in the Connecting Nature Horizon 2020 funded project. So hopefully you can see this really well. I'm going to start with the vision of Glasgow. So this is our merchant city. Glasgow has existed for 800 years, was a very compact city, and grew during the Industrial Revolution over the last 200 years. So a lot of our city is built over old industrial land, old mining, so a lot of contamination. We also have a lot of non-porous surfaces, so a lot of flooding issues. So if we take you through just to remind, the EU has set a number of nature-based solution goals. They talk about goals around urban regeneration, improving health and well-being, about how you deal with rising coastlines and falling coastlines, about how you manage your ecosystem management, how you make sure that you're making sustainable use of limited resources of material and energy, and trying to bring in a more modern view of looking at the insurance values of looking at nature-based solutions or integrated green infrastructure, and finally how we do some carbon capture. The pictures you can see on the right-hand side are Glasgow, central Glasgow. You're looking at Buchanan Street at the top of that picture, which is one of our biggest open spaces, but it's a very grey open space with very limited green. Picture at the bottom is about 10 years ago, midsummer in Scotland. It rained a lot. Our combined sewers, which are a 100-year-old sewage system, couldn't work, so the rainwater backed up, and what we got was dirty water in the streets. Not very good, and if it's in social housing areas, then it's a risk because they may not have insurance and therefore are less resilient to deal with these kind of shocks. Glasgow was picked as one of the front-runner cities within the Connecting Nature bid because it was recognised that there's a complex problem in trying to embed nature-based solutions into urban planning policy, but that Glasgow was attempting to do this. We're recognised as trying to understand the implications of changing climate. We're getting wetter. We already get 1,500 mils of rain a year coming straight off the Atlantic into Glasgow. We started collaborating with people like the Scottish Government, neighbouring councils, Scottish Water, Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, about how we can use nature-based solutions or integrated green infrastructure to solve some of our climatic issues. And we're trying to use not only the green spaces, but the blue and the grey as well. Our biggest open space is actually the River Clyde, which flows through flows through the centre of the city. We're working with the Metropolitan Glasgow Strategic Drainage Partnership, which is a West of Scotland collaboration that's looking at the flood alleviation issues within the West of Scotland, with Central Scotland Green Network, which is a government embedded project to look at a central green network across the central belt of Scotland, where 2.5 million people currently live. That's half the population of Scotland. Glasgow Clyde Valley Green Network is the West of Scotland strategic body that's pushing for the green network, and with other third-party sectors such as Green Space and Sniffer. We've also been recognised that some of our nature-based solutions are at a scale that they're impacting on policy. We recently published our new development plan, which was adopted in March of this year, and it has resource management, green network policies embedded, and we're now trying to get that as a business as usual solution, that when development comes in, they have to look at nature-based solutions within their development. And we're now moving towards trying to do bottom-up and top-down solutions. So a lot of the opportunity mapping, which I'm going to show you in a minute, is about trying to identify the opportunities, not necessarily leaping to the solutions, but allowing both the community and empowering the community to take some of those opportunities on board, as well as businesses and the councils. So our new approach, which is our main thrust in the policy, is thinking about place. Place is nothing new. 3 different things to do with place. A quote from Jane Jacobs in the 60s about dull, inert cities, and how having livable, diverse, intense cities are the seed of their own regeneration. That's about resilient places. And Sir Patrick Geddes, who operated in Edinburgh 100 years ago, town planning, I'm a town planner, so I love these kind of town planning quotes, that town planning is not mere place planning nor even work planning. To be successful, it's about folk planning. So it's about the balance between live, work and play. You could say that the European definition of nature-based solutions, which talks about the balance between economy, environment and social, is a modern connotation of that. And in Scotland, we've got a new process called the Place Standard, which you can find at placestandard.scot, which is trying to get a different conversation going between different communities to think about their place. And as you can see around the diagram that's come from the Place Standard tool, it's looking at lots of things that nature-based solutions can have a positive impact on. So in Glasgow, we have lots of data. We have data that we've developed once and we use it once. We want to develop data once and use it for multiple uses. So we're trying to experiment and use an exemplar, our open space data, which in the past was all about quantity. We're now layering quality and accessibility information onto that as well. So I'm going to take you into Knightswood, which if I go back one, you'll see is in the top northwest corner of Glasgow on the north banks of the Clyde. It's a mixed social and home owner-occupied area. Looks very green from the aerial photograph that we've got there. We've done some initial assessment looking at our amenity open space over 0.3 of a hectare, and we've done a quality and accessibility assessment on that. So what you can see is accessibility of 400 metres, proper walking distance, not crow flies, to open spaces of different types of quality. The red is poor quality, the green is good quality, the amber is in between. Normally in the past we would just go, oh, we've got a poor quality space, let's improve it. This is actually saying, is that space in the right place and is it fit for function? Another assessment we've done is on our parkland. Again, you can see the quality assessment and the accessibility. If we layer the accessibility together, we've got more of our community has access to these spaces. But if we were to layer things like flood data onto that or air quality data, it would start to give us opportunities to improve those spaces, but using different budgets, because our budgets are currently being squeezed at the moment. So stage 1 context, which is what we've just shown you, is looking at the quality of the most publicly usable open spaces, how accessible those are to people, that's a 400-metre walking distance, identifying gaps where residential areas can't get to open space, identifying gaps in the quality data we've got. So what I showed you was the amenity open space and parkland, but can we get the quality for our blue open spaces, for our grey, which is our public realm, for our sports areas, for our cemeteries, for our woodlands? What are the key issues impacting on accessibility? Can we take in specific knowledge of the demographics, the urban form, how the characteristics are determined, and can we take that forward into our open space strategy and our supplementary guidance that will be used in determining applications. Stage 2, which is the one where we're experimenting more with the help from the Connecting Nature project, is about collaboration between partners. We're wanting to take data about our surface water management, about our active travel, about our publicly usable spaces, and use that to look for opportunities to enhance and improve our habitat, to identify nature-based solutions that can help us to do that, and to identify priority areas. That leaves us with a whole load of challenges, and I want to leave you with some of the challenges that we're trying to tackle. How do you gather robust evidence from city activities? How do you capture data? And how can you educate people about how you capture that data? How can we bring in cost-benefit analysis that gives us the economic arguments for doing this in the first place? And can we develop methodology and processes that people understand and will support us in doing? Are we monitoring the right things? Are we monitoring proportionately? And are we meeting the needs of both ourselves and academics? We get lots of academics coming to us and saying we can monitor these things, but is it just for their academic paper, or are they producing something that's useful to us? Can we develop methodology that's scalable to city-wide and transferable to others? Can we demonstrate in Glasgow, the biggest urban conurbation in Scotland? And can that be taken out city-wide? And can we capture that methodology and take it elsewhere? Can we build this into our regulations? Can we take it into mainstream policy? Can we make our data sustainable? It needs to be easy to collect, easy to use, easy to maintain, and easy to share in order to make it sustainable. And can we use the fast-moving, changing technologies to help us do this and to help us with our communication? Thank you.
Gillian, thank you very much for that pleasant presentation. Let me call on Juliano to give her presentation on food and fuel challenges, evidences from Brazil. 10 minutes.
All right, thank you, Kevin, so much. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to present the work here, and I'd like to exploit a related topic, although a bit different, which is about how can we secure that the food and the energy that is being consumed in these cities, they come to a production phase and a production setup in which is compatible with nature, and actually it's using nature in a good way, right? So that's exactly the kind of topic that I'd like to exploit here based on the evidence that we've been collecting in Brazil for a while. As I mentioned in the introduction, I run this research institution here in Brazil, the Climate Policy Initiative, and we've been collecting a lot of evidence about those issues for a while. Well, the starting point here is if I start with food, I think a very good starting point is this very unusual map on Brazil land use, right? Which shows that if you take the country as a whole, and there is a lot of land in Brazil that is in the form of forests, you know, something like half of the area is being preserved in terms of the forest, and we have a lot of land that is being used as pasture land. And this is the key to understand the possibilities that, you know, we have in order to increase our ability to produce more food, right, without the need of increasing deforestation, which is usually the environmental damage associated with food production. So if you take the Brazilian case as an example, and I think this might be also important in other parts of the world, it's very important in order to feed the cities that are growing, and they're growing for good reasons. It's very important that we feed those cities based on a better management of the natural resources that are there, right? And in terms of Brazil, this the biggest opportunity is associated with the pasture land, and in particular to yield gains in pasture land, and most importantly to the conversion from pastures into cropland, right? And if you look over time, this is a process that has been happening in Brazil for a while, right? Since the 1970s, and these graphs on your left, you'll see the graph on the expansion of cattle production in Brazil, in which we have on the vertical axis the information on productivity and the horizontal axis on area. And what we see is that there was a lot of yield increases, and also since 1975, which is the second point from below here, we see a reduction in the area in the southeast. So it seems that the Brazilian agricultural sector, especially in respect of cattle, is reduce its consumption of area, which is good for deforestation in the long run, right? But at the same time, what we see is an increase in the area that is being occupied by soybeans and other crops, right? And this is pretty much the nature of the evolution of the agricultural production in Brazil. It's about replacing low productive pastures by high productive, soybeans and sugarcane and other crops. So this is a movement that points to a better use of nature as part of the food production, which I think is the key issue that we need to exploit in order to be able to address at the same time the challenge of climate change and food security, right? And if you take one step back and try to ask the question, to what extent, modern agriculture is compatible or not with the reduced deforestation in a place like Brazil, in a place in which we have this misallocation of natural resources, we can look at some of the process that took place in Brazil at scale. So if you look at the soybean in Brazil and how the soybean was developed, especially in the Central West region, if you look at it carefully, and I can exploit this in more detail, we can see that the expansion of the business was not associated with increasing deforestation if we do the computation correctly, right? And we can, if you look at what happened in another shift in agricultural productivity, which was promoted by the improved access in electricity in Brazil, there was also the case that in higher access to electricity hasn't had an impact of increasing deforestation as well, right? And then finally, if I take a third example of expansion of modern agriculture, which is a more recent movement of the entry of the sugarcane in Mato Grosso do Sul, we see pretty much the same story. So what I'm trying to exploit here is a situation which, in a place like Brazil, in which you have relatively poor governance of natural resources, and in which we have a baseline in which there are so low productivity levels in some of these pasturage, there is a room for us to increase the agricultural production without necessarily increasing deforestation, which is, I think, it's a very good news for the challenge of food security and the increasing demand for food that will appear in those cities, right? And at the same time, Brazil has been able to reduce deforestation rates. We have a full set of work that is dedicated, to how this policy has been affecting the deforestation in Brazil. I'll be happy to exploit more of this. And also, there's another very interesting situation here. If you look at the Amazon, in the areas that were deforested in the Amazon, in the period of 2004 and 2014, there was a sharp increase in the natural forest regeneration in the Amazon, which is another side of that process that I described before, in which, with the right set of policies in place and with technology in agriculture, it is possible in a place in which you have such a misallocation of natural resources, it is possible to increase agricultural production and at the same time reduce deforestation or even have this natural regeneration at scale in the data, right? So this is pretty much what I'd like to exploit in terms of the food production. Let me talk a little bit more about fuel, right? About the energy in the last 3 minutes that I have. So if you look at, and if again take Brazil as an example, we can see that our energy matrix is pretty much dominated by renewables, right? Hydroelectricity accounts for 65% of the total Brazilian energy. But at the same time, you know, if we look what's going on in the news, there are so many, you know, controversial issues about the development of the Brazilian energy, and in particular the development of hydro dams in Brazil, that these two things somehow needs to be taken into account, right? So to what extent we would like to increase our ability to generate energy, and at the same time can we mitigate the impacts on deforestation and so on and so forth. And then we had this study. I don't have time to explain what's going on in this study, but basically what we do, for each dam that were built in the Amazon, we try to build a counterfactual that will try to capture what will happen in that particular place if that dam were not built, right? And there is a method in order to build those counterfactuals, and when we apply those methods here, we can see for the Brazilian experience different patterns in terms of the impact of infrastructure on deforestation. It turns out that there are some projects in which deforestation actually went up, as most of people will think of, but also there were some projects in which the deforestation went down, right? And this is a very surprising effect, which comes to, which is related to the point that in a place like Brazil, as I said, in which, you know, the misallocation of resources is so intense, and the governance that we have in order to deal with some of the deforestation issues are relatively poor. In a place like that, you know, building a big project in some areas can actually help, you know, the local government and can help the local governance in order to manage those resources. So this is to say that the link between energy consumption and deforestation as a collateral damage, especially associated with the hydro dams, which is a clean energy that has this environmental potential damage, I think we really need to think carefully about it, right? And in terms of the hydro dam, the evidence that we have to Brazil points to these issues. Right? And then finally, I think that the good news that is provided again by technology in terms of the energy is provided, it's coming from the solar panels that are becoming cheaper and cheaper over time. And if you look at what's happened in Brazil, is that, you know, although it's still the penetration is very tiny, very low, we can see that, you know, if you're not familiar with the Brazilian map, the bubbles here, they represent the solar panels that were deployed in the country, and they coincide pretty much with the cities, where the big cities are, right? So it seems that, you know, solar panels should be part of the solution for for meeting the demand, the growing demand for energy in urban areas, right? And we can complement solar panels with other more dispatchable kind of technology, but it's a good way to go, right? So I just wanted to exploit these 2 points because, you know, and when we are planning those green cities, it's very important to take into account that the food and the energy that are the basis of our economy comes from a place in which, you know, the environment, the nature outside of the urban areas, in rural areas, are being managed in a efficient way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juliano, for that very interesting presentation. Now we are going to take have the discussion session. So I will go back to the questions that has been asked from the audience. We'll have about 30 minutes to go through this. So there are many questions that are already coming in. Can I ask all the panelists to please log back on so that we can see you and take the questions as they come? And may I also request the audience to please send in your questions so that we have a robust discussion on this, okay? First question is coming from Innocent Kabanga. The question is, how do we mainstream nature-based solutions into national policies and strategies? Very interesting. How do we mainstream nature-based solutions into national policies and strategies? Who will have a go at this? Gillian?
I'll give it a go. I think a lot of it is understanding the processes. It's also understanding how you can write that as a policy that first can be applied either across the board. So we've tried doing some of that in Scotland, where we've tried to write in, for instance, that you should provide open space within development. What we're finding is that it's not one size fits all. So you have to moderate it and change it depending on what area you're taking it into. So what we're finding, there's 32 councils approximately in Scotland, and that open space policy is having to be moderated and changed depending on whether you're within a rural area or a more densely packed area. We've also found when we've looked at climate mitigation policies, sometimes technology overtakes us, so things that the Scottish Government has thought will improve energy efficiency and bring in new uses, developers have managed to succeed to do that just because the technology in triple glazing or in insulation has improved so much that nothing new and innovative has happened. They've just carried on building the same buildings as before. So it's a bit of an iterative thing, I would think. It's a trial and error, and once something works, it sticks, and then it starts to become the norm.
Okay, any other panelists wants to chime in on this?
Yeah, let me complement a little bit. I think there is in my opinion, the sweet spot in order to mainstream some of these issues, and this I think it's broader for the whole environmental initiatives, is to try to incorporate those issues in places in which the economics are aligned with environment. And typically this is going to occur in areas in which you have a lot of inefficiency, right? You can talk about urban mobility, not in terms of emissions, but in terms of, you know, the time that people waste, you know, in very poor transportation system to get into their jobs and come back to their homes and so on and so forth. In the evidence that I just showed in Brazil, I think that in order to improve the environmental features of the agricultural production, the ways are pretty much associated with the better use of the land and the better use of the resources. So I think that is a very good starting point that is associated with the baseline that we're facing at this moment. That luckily enough, we are facing so many inefficiencies in our day-to-day lives that I think they establish a good starting point for implementing this agenda.
Okay, thank you. Ania, would you want to chime in, or is that okay?
No, it's fine.
Okay. The next question is coming from Nebota Mukete. It's about implementation. It's asking, how can the implementation process of nature-based solutions succeed? And which frameworks do we need to put in place to ensure that there is success? So if I will add, what would success look like, and how can we make it happen? Ania, do you want to start?
and give it a first shot.
Okay. Go ahead, Gillian.
I'll give it a start. Success is a difficult thing to measure. Sometimes it's success if people do it without thinking, that they think it's the norm. So things like, if you look at the example in Melbourne where they talked about rain gardens and they made it into a thing that you just picked up on the website and people started doing it as a normal thing that they would have to do. People will do things if they think it's cost effective, it will save them money, or on a developer's case, if it can make them more money. So developers in the UK will build properties with waterfront views because they can make more money. They will build places around open spaces because they can sell them for more. The idea around rooftop gardens in cities like London are taking off because, again, it's sellable. You can have compact places. So it depends. It's that balance between the social, the economic, and the environment. And a lot of it is about the cost benefits. If we can show that the cost benefit is effective, then that will help with implementation. And we'll know that we're a success once you start to get those numbers and that momentum happening.
Great.
Yeah. Can I add on this? Yeah, because I think it's really important because it also touches on the question of scale, no? So nature-based solutions can also give us the benefits we expect while they are implemented on a scale that is large enough. If you just have a small green patches that are not connected to each other, then they're not able to offer what a connected ecosystem can do. And this, of course, links to the question that was also coming up here in the chat about funding. And that's really a question I feel is not yet sufficiently answered, but also because it's a problem that we are very familiar with, especially those of us who have been looking at the question of public service and urban sustainability as well, because the question is, you know, in a financial model, how do you account for all these other types of benefits? How do you account for social and environmental benefits? And how do you leverage private investment for something that is then essentially a public good? And can cities afford not to find money for it? No, for me, it's also the question of you know, giving people, ensuring people's health and well-being, giving them clean air and clean water, for instance, is a question of public services. And can we now start asking, you know, if it's not a good investment, if it's not bankable, we're not doing it? I think it's a discussion that we as a society also need to be having, and I think we are actually. It started with climate issues, with climate adaptation issues especially, and I think we see it now in nature-based solutions. And for those that are interested, I just wanted to mention quickly 3 sources. So the NatureBased project that I was mentioning later published a paper on business models, doing a review of the papers. I can post the link in the chat or include it in my presentation. There is an interesting report for European Environment Agency on financing urban adaptation, when you would also see some of the new methods like crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, for example. And finally, there is also the European Investment Bank has a natural capital financing facility, and you can also find there some of examples of the projects they financed. But yeah, I just wanted to open this big, scary black box of money, because unfortunately, this is often a big question.
Okay, now you have already taken a question that came from Aswani in terms of how to join the group. So Aswani, I would say, if you look at the websites for these projects that have been presented on the EC website and also on GGKP, you will find all the information that you require. And also feel free to contact GGKP to Secretariat to ask for further questions. We have another question for Ania, and from Ania and Julian. He said, how do you think, Ania, how do you think about making a business case for nature-based solutions? The person who's asking the question didn't give the name, is saying that it's really a convincing one, but taking all the social and environmental and economic aspects into account. How do you make this happen? Build a business case. Just 1 minute.
Okay, I am a sociologist. Clearly, I'm not so good in doing business cases. I think that it's really difficult. I would really talk about this multiple benefits. Nature-based solutions are often referred to as no regrets solution when everyone is winning, and also to the job potential of them, because every infrastructure, whether green or gray, needs to be built and needs to be maintained. So yes. I guess I would look into this, but as I highlighted earlier, I personally also have a problem with this financing discussion.
Okay, any other take on business case?
Come on, you can do
give you a very quick city walk to read.
Yeah.
The reason why we're doing our opportunity mapping is so that you can get the asset management people involved, so that we can look at. So the biggest assets that cities have are the spaces and the places, the buildings that they manage. They manage them in a linear way, and same old, it's I-beam, as they would say in Scotland. So if we can use nature-based solutions to show them how to manage and maintain things more economically and better for the people and save money, then we can start to develop an economic case for doing it, a cost-benefit analysis. So it's about asset management from our perspective, and there's better ways of managing our assets that will allow that nature-based solutions can give us.
Juliano, from a developing country perspective, what would be the business case in 1 minute?
I agree with what was said before. I think that especially in the developing world, we face so many ways of improving our lives and at the same time generating growth and jobs and getting a better environment to live, that I think that's pretty much what will appear in the bottom line of those projects, right? To me, it's more a framing issue rather than a substantial thing. And I'm not so sure that we need additional money in order to, address public transportation challenges in Brazil or in Johannesburg or, in Mexico City, because it's part of our ability to keep growing our economies, right? We really need to tackle some of these issues as part of our development. And I think these natural solutions and the environmental agenda is just part of this effort.
Okay, really, you talk about framing the issue. I think really the business case for the person who asked this question, because this is a very important one that's recurring, balancing the social and economic and environmental aspects, the cost-benefit analysis, the money question, all these things. It keeps coming up when issues about the environment are being discussed, but we need to think about the sustainability triangle. If you are building a city, what defines a city depends on how you try to frame what is a city for you. Coming from Africa, and also having lived in Scotland, I fully understand what Gillian is talking about and the challenges they are trying to face. So for me, the real business case is getting things right, not ending up where you are trying to manage a problem, than building a city that is actually compliant to both the environmental needs of the society, the social of nature, the social needs of the people who will be living in that place, and also making money. And actually, environmental management is a good business. Biomimicry is about the best way to do any technology. So if we are able to mimic nature in the way we build our cities, we'll actually have a more sustainable and a more viable city. So, but the business case needs to be made from the framing of the development of that city in the first instance. I had to chime in on this because I feel it's a very important question as well. Ruben Barnabas is asking a question: how can the issues of green cities and nature-based solutions match the issues of urbanization? Take for example, in the developing world, where the urban population is projected to be growing very fast, and there is that urge by developing country governments to actually urbanize and become like Glasgow, or become like London, or New York, or Germany, or Bonn, or Frankfurt. So how do we match these two goals? I think that's the question that is coming, which is very important as well. Gillian, do you want to have a go?
I'll give it a go. I think Glasgow's trying to become more of a compact, dense city. Now that means that we have to question where you put your green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. So the normal assumption is all of that is on the ground. Why shouldn't it be on the roof? Why shouldn't it be on the walls? Why shouldn't it be in the courtyards? So green roofs, green walls, balconies, little inputs, stepped up buildings, buildings under hills, all of that are solutions that can be used. We're questioning some of our 1960s development where we have a motorway running right the way around the city centre. Do we need to bury some of that to open up the spaces again to get people to breathe? On the other hand, we have George Square in Glasgow, which was a great part of our Dear Green Place. It's now red tarmac, but on a sunny day, and it has roads all the way around it, on a sunny day people will still sit in it, and they will watch the world go by, and they will have their sandwiches, and they will feel as if they are breathing in a green lung, and there is some green there that is doing some carbon sequestration. We could possibly use that for our urban drainage, because we could use it to slow down the water flow. So there's all kinds of innovative solutions that you can do on a big scale, but on a small scale as well in densely packed cities. You can use some of your development land short term as growing spaces with movable growing boxes. You can use it to slow down the water. There are lots of different ways you can do it that doesn't stop you having a densely packed urban environment.
Okay, I'll go straight on the next question because it's connected and very interesting. It says, this looks like a complex strategy. So is there a strategy to bring in the private sector in the NBS world? Because this looks like it's a missing aspect in the discussion so far. How do we engage the private investors to make this happen?
You want me to try again? Certainly the EU stuff is looking at it's a three-pronged solution. So the funding from Horizon 2020 and the project that Connecting Nature and the other three like them have an economic arm as well. So it's about how can these opportunities and innovations open up business opportunities, whether that's business opportunities for companies, and there are some companies involved in some of the EU projects. Is this new businesses that communities can start, so social businesses? Are these businesses that the local government and the private sector can join together in? So there's a whole load of opportunities. I think what we're recognizing in nature-based solutions is it can't be left to one arm. It can't just be left to government, and it can't just be left to the private sector. It has to be all-inclusive, all three together. But there are business opportunities that will definitely come out of it.
If I may add to this, on engaging business, there are also different ways of doing this. And I was just thinking now about an example from Strasbourg, one of our member city in France. They have this charter called All United for Biodiversity when they are working with over 70 organizations, because Strasbourg decided to be a pesticide-free city and then also rolled out other measures designed at protecting biodiversity. And they realize that when they go to companies and start talking about biodiversity, they're not so interested. But when they say, well, yeah, you could be taking your employees, you know, and having a nice day all outside, learning how to do beekeeping and learning about different species of plants, they were interested, no? And this started this whole movement, and it got them interested in biodiversity as well. So maybe we, as people working with cities, need to also find other ways of reaching businesses with this message, no? Maybe not start like, hey, I want to talk to you about nature-based solutions, but start a little bit more with what are their current needs, and when they come on as partners, then later they are probably also more ready to come on as funders.
Okay, great. One good news, we have an offer from the audience on solving the issues of the social, economic, and environmental aspects. IISD would like to offer the speakers and GGKP the use of the sustainable asset valuation, SAVI, methodology to evaluate the environmental, social, and economic and financial performance of nature-based infrastructure. It says that SAVI works to assess if and why nature-based infrastructure can bring more value for money and more attractive internal rates of return than civil engineered alternatives. So we're moving forward as a solution coming forward. And I guess you are already aware of this and have been using it in your process, but if not, please link up. Another question from Timon Attenborg. It says, what can be the core benefits of nature-based solutions in terms of local economic development? Gillian?
Lots of co-benefits. For us, it can allow us to open up brownfield sites. So we'll look at Glasgow. We're a post-industrial, ex-shipbuilding, ex-heavy industry city. A lot of our development sites are brownfield contaminated. They have buried infrastructure, lots of non-permeable surfaces. So the nature-based solutions allow us to look at, is there energy sources there we could take? So we're built over 200 years worth of mine working. That means we're built over holes in the ground with warm water in it. Can we use that geothermal potential to look at district heating or look at different ways of heating the development that takes costs down? Can we look at the knowledge that we've got about how we can clean that soil to make the site shovel ready by using nature-based solutions rather than heavy engineering? Can we deal with the water on those sites by using the open spaces that we're creating rather than creating big storage tanks under the ground to deal with the flood incidents that might happen? So there is a lot of different ways that we can use nature-based solutions and get co-development and to open up sites that give us economic benefit as well. It might even mean that people can sell sites for more or can get more publicity. The economic development from a city's perspective is unlocking development and allowing us to kind of bring new development in.
Any additions to that?
I just wanted to add on the economic part, because actually there are so many interesting questions in the chat, and I feel, there's no way we can address all of them. But there was one that really caught my attention related to procurement, because, well, yeah, I really love procurement, and that's an area in which ICLEI has a lot of expertise. And there was a question about experiences with bio-based products and services in procurement, and we have actually done a project called InProBio. I can also share a link afterwards, that is looking at bio-based innovation in public procurement and working together with procurers to develop criteria for both products and services. So yes, that's definitely an area that is, I would say, quite hot right now.
Good. Next question is, how can existing cities overcome locking to unsustainable infrastructure? And I will add, how can you convince the cities in Africa or in South America, a mayor that wants to build his city to look nice like Glasgow or other places, to go the eco-based solution way? Elevator pitch. Who will do that?
Yeah, I can give it a try.
Okay.
Well, my strategy will be to set up in a place like, this big city in developing countries. I will try to set up a pilot in a region in which you can operate more on a greenfield basis. So you can build the concept, and then hopefully the land market or the real estate will do the business of creating the premium for these areas, right? And the example that I have in mind is the example of Manhattan, or it is the Central Park, or of any other parks in a European city. I have a strong intuition that Manhattan, the total value of Manhattan will be diminished if we destroy the Central Park, right? I think the Manhattan with the Central Park values much more than Manhattan without the Central Park, with buildings inside, right? So I think that we should somehow, in a place like that, we should try to set up a a pilot of a region in which we can develop this concept and show people how nice it is to live in that kind of standards. And then the real estate and the land market can help.
Okay, any additions, Gillian?
Yeah, I'm going to have to come in. The kind of Manhattan Park thing, the Hyde Park thing is great if you live in a resilient, educated,
right.
High-earning community. We've got those in the West End of Glasgow, 3 miles, 5 kilometres to the east in our East End.
Right.
Our communities aren't resilient. They don't know to dream for the moon. They think they're lucky if they get a bit of grass outside their door and the rubbish is picked up occasionally. They don't know that they can have better management of flood conditions when it floods. They don't know what to do. There is a lot you can do in cities to build the resilience of people. There's a lot we can do through policy, so that's why we have policies in our development plan that say new development has to provide open space, it has to provide green infrastructure, it has to look at green roofs, it has, because developers on their own would build the most number of houses on their land to the smallest standard, and they would decide that the land that is left over, the soggy stuff that nobody would want to deal with, is the space that can be the open space. And developers have in the past tried to tell us that they can make water flow uphill. So I think you need demonstrators that demonstrate to them that it's a no-brainer, that it's cost-effective, that they can make a profit. And it has to do with having an open discussion with developers and an open discussion with communities about what is possible. And a lot of it is about giving those non-resilient communities that we have, whose health and well-being being impacted on by not living beside open spaces and nature-based solutions, that they're living beside heavily engineered solutions and places that don't just feel good, that they are allowed to dream for the moon and that we're going to help them. Because the best solutions are actually somebody being able to open their door, step outside and say, breathe the fresh air and think, this is making me feel good about myself, I like this place.
Okay, I'm going to switch to questions on the developing country experience now. Basically, it's very interesting, Juliano, to see your approach to this sustainable cities question in terms of managing food and fuel and having access to energy, how you manage that nexus between food, fuel, cities, and other infrastructure needs that are required. From the perspective, from us, also the African Development Bank, when we were trying to do the development strategies for the continent, it turns out that we had a five-point agenda, out of which, feeding Africa, providing power, lighting up and electrifying Africa, lighting up and powering Africa, industrializing Africa, integrating Africa, and improving the quality of lives for Africans became the preferred 5 approaches. And interestingly, UNDP did a study independently and found that if Africa could implement this, what we call the high 5 strategies, that it would have achieved 90% of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because having access to all these basic needs for development in cities, in households, and in the country are central parts of meeting environmental goals as well. So there's a question here that is asking, saying that the agricultural example you have given is very interesting in terms of the soybean and so on, but it's asking questions about GMOs and the agroecological systems. How do you actually marry this with the topic of the discussion? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
All right. Yeah, I think there are many aspects to this question, right? To be very clear about it, unfortunately, we don't have data in order to really assess the question, right? We only, the data on agriculture inputs that is being used by farmers is very limited, and we don't have that kind of granularity. And Said that, I think there are also issues that is related to the previous discussion, right? When you are in a place like in the developing countries, there are some things that are of first order and some other stuff that is more on second order, right? And in terms of improving the environmental issues in agriculture in a place like Brazil, I think the first order issue is about the yield variation across crops and even within crops, in which, you know, we really need to improve or either to convert pastures into crops, or we need to improve the yield in cattle ranching, because otherwise the activity will keep consuming more and more resources, which is pretty bad, right? But for those guys who are more on the efficiency frontier, the guys that are, you know, the very productive farmers, I think that their consumption of chemicals tends to be very rational, and they spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure out ways of using less chemicals, not because they have any concern with the environment, but they're pretty much concerned about their costs, right? And there are some technologies there, like the no-till in Brazil, the no-tillage, which is a technology that is at the same time reduce emissions and it's good for the returns and productivity, right? And I think there are some issues about the use of chemicals as well. So I think that my answer is that, although I don't have data in order to do that, I think that kind of issue in a place like Brazil is still of second order, which means not that problem is not important, but we have much bigger problems, if you will.
Okay, next question from Aaron Wu is very important as well. It says, it has two small questions. One is the views that have been presented here, he or she feels that we are still conceptualizing nature as something that is static and external to society. Is there talk of any solutions that don't merely rely on greater levels of management or capitalization of nature? Basically, fusing the three aspects together instead of seeing it as things to be managed differently, the environment, society, and the economy. Is there nothing like the bioeconomy that everything works together and actually in sync for sustainability?
Can I just drop it? I'm a town planner, so I'd say town planning does that anyway. The quote I gave you on place from Geddes was live, work, play. If you don't get the balance between live, work, and play in the space right, if you don't get the balance between economic, social, and environment right, then you put it in a silo and you're going to fail. You're doing it wrong. It's about how all of those interact and you do them. We've probably spent a long time compartmentalizing things in our own brain, but they're in a compartment and you put them in. So if you want to think about how a space works, if it doesn't work for the humans, they're not going to look after it for the environment. If it doesn't work for the environment, the human's health is going to suffer. And if it doesn't work economically on both of them, the environment and society is going to suffer. So it's about place, it's about people, it's about your interaction with the environment, it's about how you work with that place. So it's get the balance right, you're doing it right. If you're doing one on its own, you're not doing things right.
Perfect. Actually, this is a very good way to conclude the webinar, and I'll try to summarize a little bit of what we have I have learned from the distinguished panelists and also the distinguished audience that have been asking very good questions. To some of the audience that we have not been able to address your questions is just because of time. It's not that we prioritize one question or the other. First, let me start from where Gillian stopped. Everything about sustainable cities, nature-based solutions for greener cities is actually comes to bringing the three aspects of development together. The mistake we've made is that we have conceptualized the economy as something different, the society as something different. Then the environmental movement came at later on, trying to bring the environment as part of the thing. But it should actually be the beginning, because natural capital is the bed from which everything is the bedrock for everything. So we need to think about how to make that triangle equilateral so that in every development agenda, we are giving equal priority, equal weightings to economic, to the social, and to the environmental. That is the only way we can get an inclusive growth that is sustainable, good for the environment, good for people, and good for everyone. Let's also remember that nature does not really need people. We need nature. If we don't do sustainable cities, we are going to be having flooding and different kinds of disasters that we see all the time. So, and if we also don't do environmental, economic planning, we're going to have poverty and all the issues that becomes a problem for the environment. So there are feedback loops in all these things that we really need to think about as we do development planning. And in summary, I would like to go back again to what do we mean by sustainable city. I think for me, for GGKP, the definition by IUCN, the International Union on Conservation for Nature, which defines nature-based solutions as actions that protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural capital or modified ecosystems, address social challenges effectively and adaptively, and simultaneously provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So you see, this is about bringing all the three things together in order to move things forward. I will try in the next 2-3 minutes to summarize what I have learned from Ania, from Gillian, and from and also from Juliano. Ania has summarized for us what nature-based cities would look like: innovating with nature, biomimicry, and also 3 key aspects that we need to look at: protecting nature, and also nature management in order to be able to protect people, and using the skills, indigenous knowledge, and everything we have, connecting with nature, and also learning from nature. Gillian, on the other hand, from urban planning perspectives, has spoken to us about urban regeneration, coastal management, doing carbon capture and storage to manage climate change issues, even in city ecosystems, and ultimately doing integrated nature management in cities. And told us that only through doing this can we build resilient cities that will be able to sustain the people, the economy, and the ecosystem together. And if we did that, we'll be using nature-based solutions to solve societal problems. And policies are already emerging that from their work that can allow for transposing this or scaling this out and the lessons they've learned to other places. On the other hand, and expectedly, Juliano talked about how to manage the basic needs of humans in developing economies while managing nature in cities. Growing the food that we need in a sustainable way by increasing productivity, basically sustainable intensification and sustainable farming. How also to be able to access energy, food, and fuel in order to be able to maintain society in the economies within cities without actually polluting cities very much. When he was giving that presentation, I was thinking about many cities in Africa where the problem is not actually having the pavements that you need to make pervious to be able to drain the water, but actually having too much of non-paved roads and non-paved buildings, and buildings that are not sustainable and would collapse, and also even building on riparian areas, no gutters on the roads, and that creates environmental problems in itself. So dealing with these basic needs of humans are important aspects of managing and also creating sustainable cities. So, and the mixed results that you found, Gillian, is not surprising because it depends on the context, and we have to contextualize everything that we do, because what works in Glasgow may not actually work in another city, in Accra or in Lagos or in Nairobi. So we need to be able to follow that kind of contextualization. And that brings us to the end of this webinar, and I would like to thank all the participants and GGKP and all the panelists for giving us the opportunity to have this great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.